Okay, everyone, I think we'll get started because we have a few minutes of opening remarks and things. So hopefully as people join, they won't have to miss any of Phyllis. So just good afternoon, first of all, and it's my pleasure to welcome you on this eve of International Women's Day to our presentation on women deacons with Phyllis Zagano. My name's Kathy Peed, and on behalf of the CLC Planning Group, a number of whom are on the webinar today, I want to thank you for joining us. Concerned Lay Catholics is an independent group which came together in 2018 and responds to the scandal of clergy sexual abuse in our church. Since that time, we have come to understand more deeply the critical role that the laity can and must play in promoting healing and reconciliation for all individuals who have been wounded by our church. We endeavor through our various programs and activities to help lay Catholics find their own voice, bring it forth, in order to live out the laity's role of co-responsibility in our church. So if you have a minute at some point, please do explore our website, concernedlaycatholics.ca, and sign up on our contact page if you haven't already done so to receive our monthly newsletter, which highlights news and upcoming presentations. I'm now going to invite my colleague, Beverly Bronte-Tinkew, to offer the opening prayer as well as CLC's land acknowledgement and statement of solidarity with victims of sexual abuse.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, or whatever time it is for you. Good day. Creator God, source of all being, we place ourselves in your holy presence. We ask you to open our hearts and minds to each other and to what you're saying to each of us through this presentation today. Help us to embrace and further the synodal process by speaking and truly listening with honesty and humility and great love. May it bring hope and healing to our wounded church. We continue to pray for the victims and survivors of sexual abuse. May all who have been abused in any way by your church's ministers be respected and receive real justice and authentic reparation. May we be beacons of Christ's healing light and compassion to them, to their families, and to all the world. Amen.
Amen.
For our land acknowledgement, we acknowledge that many of the lands we live, work, and meet on are the traditional territories of Indigenous peoples across this country. As settlers, it is our responsibility to learn about and acknowledge our colonial history and the ways in which we may continue to perpetuate it. As people of faith working for justice, we are called to discern how we are to respond to the calls of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and how we can support Indigenous peoples across this land we know as Canada. The CLC has a statement of solidarity, which is as follows. We stand in solidarity with all victims of clergy sexual abuse. We are moved by compassion to reflect deeply on the suffering of our wounded brothers and sisters and to pray for them always. We make a commitment to educate ourselves and others about the devastating impact of the scandal in our church. We promise to promote justice and healing for victims and their families and for all those injured by this betrayal of our deepest values. We commit ourselves to the transformation of church structures and clerical culture that put protecting the institution above justice for victims and accountability for offenders. We rely on God in all of this, asking that we be sustained in this commitment we have made.
Thank you, Bev. It's now my pleasure to invite Lisa Polk, Director of Pastoral Services and Operations for the Archdiocese of Regina, to introduce Phyllis for us today.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you for this honor. Dr. Phyllis Zagano is a senior research associate in resident and adjunct professor of religion at Hofstra University. She is the author of the award-winning Holy Saturday, an argument for the restoration of the female diaconate in the Catholic Church, and many other award-winning publications. Her recent book, Just Church, which I have a wonderful copy of, Catholic Social Teaching, Synodality, and Women, examines synods past and present in relation to the application of Catholic social teaching to questions regarding women in the Church. On August 2nd, 2016, Pope Francis appointed her to the Papal Commission for the Study of Women in the Diaconate. I had the opportunity to hear Phyllis speak a couple of years ago at the Los Angeles Religious Ed Congress, where I also picked up a copy of the book Just Church. I find great inspiration from Phyllis's words in my own work as a woman in diocesan leadership. On this day, before International Women's Day, we are reminded of the importance of recognizing women's gifts, not just to the Church, but to society as a whole. We are really grateful for feminist scholars like Phyllis who keep the story alive. Welcome, Dr. Phyllis Zagano.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Beverly. I just came back from LA speaking again, and the topic was Synodality 101. And that's kind of where we are now, because at the top, I need to tell you, there is no Vatican decision on women deacons. There's been a lot of media attention to a 7-page letter written only in Italian, or published only in Italian, by Giuseppe Petrocchi, who was the chair of the Second Vatican Commission, or the Second Pontifical Commission, actually, on women in the diaconate. And in my research, actually, just this week, I've kind of figured out that it was originally written in French by Denis Dupont-Fauville, who was the secretary of that commission, and then translated into Italian. And I'm giving you this background because it is totally unreadable in just about any language you can think of. It's a very clunky letter. And but the good news is, with the help of a professional translator in Rome, I have translated it into English, and it's awaiting publication at America Magazine. You know, we want to make sure we've made no mistakes because it is a document coming from the Vatican. So I'm not really going to speak directly from my translation in case they change it before it's published. But I have written actually a couple of essays about that. So we'll start with that. And then I'll talk a little bit about how we got there from here, and wrap it up in about 40 minutes so we can have more conversation. So shortly before Christmas last year, you know, a lot of media outlets reported what they termed a decision on the Church's continuing discernment about restoring women to the ordained diaconate. Fact of the matter is, there's been no decision. Absolutely no decision. The Vatican press office at that time, I think it was December 4th, published a letter from Cardinal Giuseppe Petrocchi, who is now the retired Archbishop of L'Aquila in Italy and was president of the commission, as I said, which partly reported secret votes taken during 3 sessions of Pope Francis's Second Commission studying women deacons. Now, while the letter appears to exclude the possibility of ordaining women as deacons, its incomplete recording of the secret votes and its lack of reference to serious historical, theological, and anthropological research predict its own outcome. I have to tell you, I was on the Second Commission. I'm still under papal secrecy, but we seem to have done a whole lot more work than they did. I can tell you that my commission, because I'm reporting now from media reports who are quoting people, and also from people who have been quoted in the media, specifically the president of the International Union of Superiors General, UISG. That group had initially asked for the first commission, She said that, they got the history portion of our report, and that's correct. But I'm telling you, it was a pretty good document, which to be clear, I have not read since we turned it in because I don't want it to bleed into my own writing. So it's I'm in an interesting position here. Having said that, I've also, doing research this week, figured out how the voting went. In the Petrocchi letter, there are 3 sessions reported on. The first session is in September of 2021. The second session is in July of 2022. And the third is in February of 2025. In the first session, 10 people were named. And we have the names of those 10 people. If you want to go into the weeds, I could probably figure out who, but remember who. But 10 people were named. Before the commission met, one member became ill. He did not attend the first commission meeting. And he was replaced, actually. He was replaced by a priest from the Vatican, from the Gregorian. He was a deacon, an American deacon. At the second meeting of the commission, another member became ill. And he did not attend. And a third member became ill, and she did not attend. So 3 members did not attend the second meeting, but one had already been replaced. The first meeting has 10 votes. The second meeting has 8 votes. And now we get to the third meeting. Well, by the time of the third meeting, one of the ill members from the second meeting had died. But the ill member from the first meeting had recovered. So they're back now to 10 votes. My point is, without going through the matrix of who did what to whom, is that none of the 3 votes are taken by the same group of people. It's a rotating membership. And more importantly, none of the 3 meetings had the same group of people discussing whatever they were discussing. So to me, that it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make any sense. And as I said at the top, the letter itself is quite opaque. It's quite difficult to read in any language. It's already been, my commentary on it and a Portuguese translation has already been published by a journal called Sete Margens in Lisbon. But the editor of Sete Margens translated it from Italian to Portuguese, which is something there's no way I could do. And I believe it will be published in Spanish in April in a journal called Phase. Again, that editor translating it from Italian to Spanish and translating my commentary, from English to Spanish. And then, as I said, I've translated into English from Italian with help, and that English plus my commentary should appear at some point from America Magazine. The commission itself did not determine the question of ordaining women as deacons. Continual discernment on that question is magisterially mandated by the final document of the Worldwide Synod on Synodality. The commission, which, as I said, has a rotating membership, preferred to recommend the invention of new ministries for women that do not require ordination. So let me tell you a little bit more about this, and then we can see how we got here from there. Early on in the footnote, the letter firmly connects the diaconate with the priesthood. That's the first mistake, because that opposes several church documents. Connecting the priesthood and the diaconate as a single unit. It's called the unicity of order, deacon, priest, bishop. It opposes the Second Vatican Council's dogmatic constitution on the church, Lumen Gentium 21. It opposes the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and it opposes Pope Benedict XVI motu proprio, omnium in mentem, which was presented in 2009, all of which affirm that the diaconate is not part of the priesthood. Now, where I come from, the council, the catechism, and a papal motu proprio outrank an opinion letter written by an unnamed group of anonymous people who took secret votes. However, they're the ones that got their names in the paper. Well, they didn't get their names in the paper, but their considerations did get in. So the church teachings that we hold deny the false theory of the unicity of orders, okay, which in reverse could create a problem for the people who are arguing against the diaconate. Why? Well, because if you reverse it, it says, because women are not known to have been ordained as priests, they therefore could not be ordained as deacons. However, we know women have been ordained as deacons. So that logic argues that women can be ordained as priests. Now, that's not my research, but I do try to point this out to people who argue the unicity of order. But they really are separate. They're totally separate and have been historically. Now, building on a false notion that because women can't be priests, they can't be deacons, this particular letter argues and affirms a belief that women cannot image Christ, okay, and therefore cannot serve as deacons in persona Christi. And I would contend that to limit Jesus Christ to the human male person is a neo-Aryan understanding of Jesus Christ and of the resurrection. And it is the result of what many scholars, beginning with, I think, Elizabeth Johnson, calls naive physicalism. The resurrected Christ is and was the human male Jesus, but we are all, I mean, unless Sister Thomas Aquinas was wrong in the 4th grade when she told me I was going to be the only Jesus anybody saw that day, we have to have an expanded knowledge of who Christ is in the world. Now, further, by assuming that women cannot be ordained as deacons because they can't image Christ, that letter restricts understandings of humanity of women. We have to appreciate, you have prayed for the victims of sexual abuse. I would expand it to pray for the victims of misogyny. I had dinner in LA with a psychologist. I said, I'm starting to think that what we call clericalism is really narcissistic, sociopathic behavior. And he said, yes. He said, absolutely. So there are greater forms of abuse that we suffer in our churches. And throughout the world, women not in our churches suffer all manner of discrimination just because they're women. And you know the list: female genital mutilation, dowry burning, wife beating, and worse. Now, the document suggests new ministries. Instead of a return to the historically documented and theologically possible, if several cardinals are to be believed, an anthropologically affirmed ordination of women as deacons. Now, while it argues that new ministries could, and I'm quoting here from the letter in my English translation, the new ministries would, quote, constitute a prophetic sign, especially where women still suffer situations of gender discrimination, close quote. I believe such would produce the opposite effect. Because if you affirm that women cannot be ordained because they cannot image Christ as fully human persons, that proposal endangers women even more. And it can be argued that the document states that women are not made in the image and likeness of God. And I will tell you, when I speak with people who are not involved in this discussion, and I say that I am told women can't be ordained as deacons because they can't image Christ, they're horrified. Absolutely horrified. Well, anyway, as it happened, at its first meeting in September of 2021, as I said, only 2 of the unnamed commissioners voted in favor of ordaining women as deacons. And right away, they call it a 3rd degree of holy orders. So this is in the document. And again, the implication right on is that it is part of priesthood. And 2 others abstained. So now you have 4 out of the 10 people who attended, and we're never really quite sure who was where. 4 four of them are saying, no, that's not right, or at least we can't affirm it. Now, again, because the votes are incompletely reported, there's no way to trace any development of what they call I love this word, and it is in the Italian, thematic nuclei. We puzzled on that a long time about that, but the thematic nuclei, which is what the letter calls the key concepts, which are supposedly under discussion. Now, further, the letter cites an additional secret document. It's titled in a footnote, the final document of the Commission on the Diaconate of Women, 7 February 2025. And in support of its dismissive commentary on the documentation submitted in response to the request for the dicastery of the doctrine of the faith during the Synod on Synodality's October 2024 final meeting in Rome. And I'll get back to that because we really should understand how this document, this Patrochi letter came to be. Anyway, the letter stunningly relates the, quote, masculinity of Christ with what it terms, quote, the nuptial meaning of salvation. And I'll read the paragraph here. Quote, the masculinity of Christ, and therefore the masculinity of those who receive holy orders, is not accidental, but an integral part of sacramental identity, preserving the divine order of salvation in Christ. Altering this reality, this is again quoting from the letter with my translation, altering this reality would not be a simple adjustment of the ministry, but a rupture of the nuptial meaning of salvation. Now, if anybody knows what that means, let me know, okay? Happily, half of the people at that third meeting, I guess it was the third meeting, 5 unknown commissioners at this point voted anonymously. It's been affirmed to me that these were all secret ballots to confirm this statement. Apparently, at this final commission meeting in February of 2025, there does not appear to have been a vote on one of the concluding statements in the letter, which, in a way, it seems very odd. Because the final comments in the letter credit, quote, the Marian dimension as the soul of any diaconia. So if they want to see the diaconate as a female or Marian ministry, then maybe, we shouldn't have male deacons. I mean, it's kind of different. Anyway, there have been 6 Vatican studies on the diaconate. This one is a result of the most recent one. But I think that what we might profit from doing is understanding how we got to the this Patrochi letter, which is again astonishing to me. I have been told this is the Holy See's position on the matter. And that to me, even that is disturbing because the other studies, my commission documents were not published. This commission's documents, actually their reports have not been published. This is a letter that supposedly summarizes the second commission's reports. The only report that's been published is the 2002 report of the International Theological Commission, and that report, that opinion of the International Theological Commission in 2002, is it's an expansion of a 1997 document written by the International Theological Commission that approves women in the diaconate, but it was not promulgated because the president of the ITC at the time, the prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, would not promulgate it, his name being Joseph Ratzinger. And even earlier than that, in the 70s, the first iteration of the International Theological Commission took up the question of women deacons. Two priests, Vagagini, Kamal Deliz, Benedictine, and Nemeshegi, a Jesuit, wanted to force a positive vote on restoring women to the ordained diaconate. But that whole commission, now this is the first International Theological Commission, which started in 1969, shelved the discussion, moved aside the discussion of women in the diaconate, and focused on women in the priesthood. And so you find that the letter, or what came out, the opinion that came out from that first iteration of the International Theological Commission was the 1976 work Inter in Seniores that says women can't be priests. Inter in Seniores, interestingly enough, has two main arguments. One, they don't have the authority. The church doesn't have the authority to ordain women as priests. And secondly, guess what? Women can't image Christ. When you move forward in the discussion about priesthood and you get to 1994 with Ordinatio Sacerdotalis in 1995 with the Responsum ad Dubium, if you look very carefully, you will not see any argument that women cannot image Christ. But that trope came back and to snap at us in 2002 with the ITC document on the diaconate, which I've written about really extensively, which says that the diaconate is in persona Christi servi. Now, I haven't finished the research on this, but I will tell you we are looking into the way the diaconate has been discussed in Vatican documents. And we're pretty much coming down on the fact that it's always been in nomine ecclesiae, in the name of the church. The deacon worked in the name of the church or in the name of the hierarchy. And I'm searching the documents that show that, because the in persona Christi servi commentary or affirmation about the diaconate kind of dropped in from outer space, and that has been carried forward now into this Patrochi letter, which says that women can't image Christ. I don't think it's a good thing to do. If you're worried about misogyny, if you're worried about narcissism, if you're worried about sociopaths, if you're worried about real clericalism, it's not a good thing to say that women can't image Christ. It just doesn't help. So, in the next half hour or so, 20 minutes maybe, because I know you're going to have questions, I'm going to talk to you a little bit of how we got to the Patrochi letter, which is kind of I won't give too much of a tour. I think you know about the Synod. You know that the problem was whether women would have a vote. But I think it's important to recall what Pope Francis said at the outset in the Synod's preparatory document. He said that this journey, which follows in the wake of the Church's renewal proposed by the Second Vatican Council, is both a gift and a task. And by journeying together and reflecting together on the journey that has been made, the Church will be able to learn through her experience which processes can help her to live communion, achieve participation, and open herself to mission. And that's the key to all of this. What is the mission of the Church? The mission of the Church is to spread the gospel. The work of the deacon is to drag the ambo to the street, to live and teach the word, the liturgy, and charity. But it's all about the gospel. That's all about the gospel. So these are the key words, as you know: communion, participation, and mission. And there were national meetings. You know about the continental stage, and it's important that the continental assemblies that met in 2023, each of them produced a response that spoke to the question of women. Every single continental response spoke about women. The North American report, which you participated in Canada, the North American report was the result of 12 Zoom sessions for delegates of the United States and Canada. And 56% of the people who participated in those Zoom meetings were diocesan employees. So right away, we have the question of who's deciding what about whom. In any event, they asked for women to really take up leadership roles and named women as a marginalized group in the church. And its delegates proposed an examination of decision-making roles in leadership and ordination. As you must know, your representatives and those from the United States met in Florida to present the report. And there has been criticism about the report and the methodology by which it was presented. However, it didn't go away. The question of women deacons didn't go away. And in October 2023, the Instrumentum Laboris synthesized the question. And for the October 2023 meeting, there was, it began with a retreat, but the fact of the matter is women deacons was considered. I think what's important here at the onset of the actual meeting after the retreat with Cardinal Radcliffe and Sister Maria Ignazia Angelini, in introducing the section, I think it was B2 or something, on the question of who can participate, the Synod's Relator General, Jesuit Cardinal Jean-Claude Hollerich, emphasized the fact that women are equal in the eyes of God. Women are equal in the eyes of God. And I quote from him, "The baptism of women is not inferior to the baptism of men. How can we ensure that women feel that they are an integral part of this missionary church? Do we, the men, perceive the diversity and richness of the charisms of the Holy Spirit given to women?" And it's a long discursive discussion about women. But he ends saying, if women feel that their voice is listened to as much as the voice of men, but they still feel discriminated against by not being admitted to the ordained ministry, we have to think about it. We have to think about it. And that was at the onset of the first session. We have to think about it. Well, they thought about it, and they did. The question actually to be discussed there was, how can the church of our time better fulfill its mission through greater recognition and promotion of the baptismal dignity of women? I would hang on to that phrase, the baptismal dignity of women, which to me is in opposition to the argument that women cannot image Christ. What happens when you're baptized? You take on Christ. I mean, anyway. And in the Instrumentum Laboris, most of the continental assemblies and the synthesis of several Episcopal conferences call for the question of women's inclusion in the diaconate to be considered. And it asked, is it possible to envisage this, and why? And at the time, the cardinal bishop, who was the prefect of the Congregation for Bishops, was asked about that. He's asked about women in the diaconate. He says, well, the short answer is it's a work in progress. And on the ordination, the question was asked by Josh McElree, who now works for Reuters. I think at the time he was still at the National Catholic Reporter. But the cardinal said, he said that there is a very significant and long tradition of the church regarding women priests. However, given the fact of two commissioned to study women deacons, quote, there certainly is openness to giving it consideration. Now, I can tell you I have a book coming out in a few weeks, actually. It's early May, it'll be out, called The Vatican and Women Deacons. And there's been a lot of consideration. Okay, I did a lot of archival research to each of the six commissions and studies that I referenced. And it's the same question circular over and over and over again. Anyway, the Synod report in 23 says that admits that different positions have been expressed regarding women's access to diaconal ministry. There were fights. Okay. The big discussion about this. Some people said, it's part of our tradition, and some people said it's not. Some people said it would be bowing to the signs of the times. You have all sorts of things, terms floating around, gender theory, and that's the big one, gender, I think it's called gender theory, gender studies, feminism, radical feminists, all of that gets thrown around with this. But the church teaching that all are made in the image and likeness of God has to be central in this question. Anyway, so what happens between 2023, the Synod members said, we want to see the results, the reports of these two commissions. What happened to the first Pontifical Commission? What happened to the second Pontifical Commission? We want to see their results. We want to see their reports. And it should be, the discussion has to continue. If possible, the results of this research should be presented to the next session of the Assembly. What happened is it was taken off the table. It was taken off the table. The synthesis report of the Synod itself said, and actually it was clear from the outset, that at the beginning of the Synod, we're talking 2021, there will be no discussion of doctrine. Absolutely no discussion of doctrine. What does that mean? Well, if you're not going to discuss doctrine, you're not going to discuss, although it's argued what level of doctrine it is, you're not going to discuss women priests. But from the very beginning, it's okay to discuss women deacons. Why? Because restoring women to the diaconate is a question of praxis, not of doctrine. Okay? There has never been any doctrinal discussion or banning of women deacons. There are legal bans, starting really in the 5th century with Gelasius complaining that the women are at the altar doing the same thing the men do. That is, the women deacons are performing the same diaconal liturgical ministry as the men deacons. You have various synods here, there, and everywhere in Epayan and various places, mostly in France, complaining and saying, no, you can't ordain women as deacons anymore. Well, if you can't ordain them anymore, that means they've been doing it. Okay. And finally, the diaconate itself dies out around the 12th century. But that's a separate issue. It dies out around this 12th century because priests, mostly the priests in Rome, but priests elsewhere, were getting a little annoyed because who was getting elected as bishop? We have about 35, 36, 37 bishops of Rome who were never deacons. Well, who were never priests. They were deacons who were elected as the Pope. Okay. So what happened? The cursus honorum, the steps, the stages to priesthood, right? Became solidified, became codified by a man named Gratian with his decretals. And so in order to become a priest, which was really the kind of goal, you were first blessed or ordained in the 4 minor orders of porter, lector, exorcist, and acolyte, and then ordained to the minor order of subdeacon, the major order of subdeacon, the major order of deacon, and then the major order of priests. Where are women in this? They're not. Okay, they're just not. Because the process had become so solidified that you went through these stages and finally became a priest. Of course, we have Bishop Ottoni in northern Italy, in Lucca. He didn't get the memo, so he kept ordaining women as deacons until the middle of the 12th century. But for the most part, the diaconate of women died out. After the diaconate of men as a permanent vocation died out. Sure, there was still, what we call permanent deacons. It's a bad term. somewhere, in various places. But for the most part, deacons were on the way to priesthood, whether they were deacons for a day or 6 months or a year, depending on the practice in the territory, and that became really de rigueur until the Council of Trent. Trent tried to fix this. Trent said, you know what? People who are in ministries should exercise those ministries. So if you're a lector, you're a lector, and you do lecturing. If you're a porter or a lector, or exorcist or acolyte, that is your ministry. If you're a subdeacon, that is your ministry. If you're a deacon, that is your ministry. But it never really caught on, okay, until we got to the Second Vatican Council. And in the Second Vatican Council, the diaconate as a permanent ministry was affirmed. But another interesting thing happened. 5 ministries were kind of suppressed or collapsed. And so you end up with no subdiaconate. You have no real porter. You keep the lector. You have no real exorcist. And the duties of the subdeacon and the porter, for the most part, the exorcist, are collapsed into the lector and the acolyte. And those are important installed lay ministries. I contend these are the new ministries that we need to concentrate on. Why? Because you must, if you wish to be ordained as a deacon, you must serve time, or you must serve as a lector installed permanently and as an acolyte installed. Okay, that's counter to the arguments of the Council of Trent. But we'll leave that alone for now, because the law is you have to be installed as a lector, and you have to be installed as an acolyte in order to be ordained as a deacon. And guess what? Women can now be installed as lectors and acolytes. And that's very, very important. We can talk about catechists in the Q&A if you want. But this is not a question of doctrine. It's very important to maintain and understand that it is not a question of doctrine. So what happens in between the first and second sessions of the Synod? Congratulations, women deacons are removed from the Synod discussion. That's it, bada bing. The Holy Father established study groups. He established 10 study groups and 5 working groups. And study group 5, specifically questions regarding women in the church, including women in the diaconate, were to be the purview of study group 5, charged to investigate, quote, some theological and canonical matters regarding specific ministerial forms. Now, that's very nice. But again, hear this, some theological and canonical matters regarding specific ministerial forms. That would indicate that the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith and I think it's the group on legislative texts would be looking into this. But anyway, the Synod opens, study group 5 gives a report, but we don't know who they are. The report is given by Cardinal Fernandez, who digresses from his printed text and says, you know what? We know what the Holy Father thinks, but this is still under study. Because if you'll remember, in May the previous year, Pope Francis had spoken with Nora O'Donnell on CBS TV, and he said, no, women couldn't be ordained as deacons. Cardinal Fernandez in the Synod disagreed with that. Of course, having taken it off the agenda for the Synod, the topic of ordaining women as deacons became a hot topic within the Synod. As anyone knows, if you say you can't talk about it, you will. So even so, there was. I can again go into more detail about about that. There was consternation about women in the diaconate at the Synod. There was a meeting. Cardinal Fernandez said he would, after his presentation, he said he'd meet with people. 100 people showed up. He didn't show up. A couple of staffers showed up with a piece of paper saying, if you have any comments, send them to us. And the women of the Synod got very upset, about 15 of them. And within 2 days had a meeting with Pope Francis. Actually, 50 women showed up at this meeting. And by the following Monday, Cardinal Fernandez had apologized and had another meeting. That meeting is something I would recommend you listening to. It's a lot of it in English, and it was recorded by Vatican Radio or Vatican Media somehow. There is a recording of that whole meeting, and it's extraordinary because people are really angry, saying we need a decision. This is silly. How long can you go on? And again, I would reference my new book. How long can this go on? We're talking now 53 years of the same discussion going around in circles. They can't say no. They just don't want to say yes. Anyway, so what happens after that, the study group 5 comes out in September and tells the world, well, we're not really going to talk about women deacons. We've given this over we've recalled the commission. We've recalled the commission. Well, we've recalled the commission to do what? To study the submissions made both to study group 5, which in essence is the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, Armando Mateo, and also to the Synod office. And I want to point out that's a very interesting thing here, because when the submissions were requested, the Synod office said, yes, send everything to study group 5, but also send it to us. So the Synod office knows what study group 5 got, and the Synod office knows what Petrocchi's commission got when it was recalled. So, the materials were presented. We have the final report and the final document. And the final document, which is magisterial teaching, you'll remember, says that, I'll just read you this part and then we get to questions. This assembly asks for full implementation of all the opportunities already provided for in canon law with regard to the role of women, particularly in those places where they remain underutilized, the women remain underutilized. There is no reason or impediment that should prevent women from carrying out leadership roles in the church. What comes from the Holy Spirit cannot be stopped. Additionally, the question of women's access to diaconal ministry remains open. This discernment needs to continue. And so we end where we began. And my end is my beginning, as T.S. Eliot would say. The letter to Pope Leo, which is dated September 18th, 2025, presents a partial report of the activities of the Second Commission. It's signed by Petrocchi and Denis de Ponfoville, and it indicates that the Second Commission viewed at least some part of the First Commission and partly reports on the Second Commission's votes on a few proposals, not all of them. And while the writer notes that, quote, his considerations are inevitably incomplete and fragmentary with respect to the documentation produced by the commission he chaired, media reports indicated a negative decision had been issued by the Vatican. Okay? There's no decision. There's absolutely no decision. And I can tell you, I was sitting in Mass one day and one of the women religious in the parish come up to me and said, how do you feel about the decision? I said, there was no decision. And so I think the important takeaway for you is to understand that this discernment must continue. And the discernment is not whether women can be ordained as deacons. The discernment is whether the church needs women as deacons and whether the church deserves women as deacons, and whether the church will return to its tradition of women ordained as deacons. So I've been going on a little too long. They're going to curate your questions. We can talk forever. I mean, I'm not going anyplace, so let me know.
Kathy, do you want to?
Sure. Yeah, I can share a couple of questions that have come into the chat, and then we'll see how that goes. There's a question about trying to understand if the discussion is about the possibility of ordaining women deacons or to explore the different ways women serve in the church today. Is it about titles?
Well, except for that last part, yes. I think it's not either or. I think it's both and. Because it's a big church. We have, so many people in so many lands. I remember sitting in Rome with the bishops of Cambodia and Thailand, and they said, we wouldn't care whether we had male or female deacons. We don't have the educated people. And I think that's where the ministry of catechists comes in for two reasons. In Africa, for example, many men choose to be catechists, ministers of the word. They effectively can run communities, and women can too. But the reason the men choose to be catechists and not deacons is because it's very difficult if a man's wife dies, for him, a deacon's wife dies, for him to remarry. And so we have to remember that the new ministry of catechists, Pope Francis specifically said this is not a step on the way to the diaconate. This is a different thing. I was told by an American bishop who worked in Honduras not long ago, or he told me not long ago, that when he worked in Honduras, there was a ministry of the word, men, women, married, not women, not married, religious lay, and these ministers of the word effectively ran parishes. They weren't formally Canon 517, paragraph 2 parish life coordinators, but they held lectio, they held meetings. They would effectively kind of hire or get sacramental ministers for their communities. They were given faculties to witness marriages and to solemnly baptize members of their communities. So I guess it's a both and situation, both the new ministries, the installed lector, the installed acolyte, going back to the arguments of Trent, that you are what you do, you do what you are, and the ministry of catechists and the ordained ministry of the deacon. I think we need to understand how to expand the ministries of the church in every direction we possibly can, in whatever situation and whatever place we're in. I don't think there are certain areas of the world that would accept the ordination of women as deacons. They might not even accept the installation of women as lectors and acolytes. There are certainly dioceses in the United States that won't accept that. But to allow, again, communion, participation, and mission. Communion, we're all in this together. We know what we can do, and we know what our doctrine is. We know what our teachings are. We understand that, and the mission really is to bring the gospel to the world, not just to us. We don't own it. We don't keep it in a locked drawer in the basement. We need to bring the gospel to the world, and the question of participation is who does what. And right now, we're kind of talking about who's allowed to do what. The big problem, I think, of women deacons, and I would reference here the ordination of Deaconess Angelique in Zimbabwe by the Greek Orthodox Church of Zimbabwe. Metropolitan Seraphim has affirmed to me that he used the same ordination ceremony he uses to ordain men as deacons. The Synod in Africa, the Orthodox Synod, has affirmed she is sacramentally ordained. But she is restricted from altar service. And that's a whole nother thing to think about. There are certain cultures that still can't handle the idea of women being near the sacred. They still have a feeling that women are dirty, not to mention stupid, but that, so not everybody can. While you might be able to accept an ordained woman as a deacon, you might not be able to accept her in altar service. Why is that important? The two parts of the Mass that the deacon are involved in, proclaiming the gospel, possibly preaching in the Latin Church, and then preparing the elements for the sacrifice. And the job of the deacon is to minister the cup. Now, in North America, that's no big deal. We have Eucharistic ministers all over the lot. We have women acolytes really in many places. Pope Leo, when he visited a parish in Trastevere not too long ago, had 2 women acolytes, and the biggest complaint was that one of them was wearing Adidas sneakers, and I said, the poor girl, it's probably the best shoes she owned, but it just depends on your culture. And the culture, I will say quite boldly, needs to change. Because if we're looking at certain countries, particularly those in the Middle East, which are now suffering so terribly, the women are still suffering with or without the war. And so, or in Africa, women are suffering because there are still cultures that engage in female genital mutilation. There are still cultures that consider women as dirty. And that needs to be overcome. So that's where I return to my argument at the top with the Patrochi letter by saying women can't image Christ. If my church says that I'm not made in the image and likeness of God, how is that heard by cultures that, it's beyond misogyny. How is that heard by cultures that feel that women are just not even the same species? There was, I have to remember it, there was an argument, the Querelle de Femme, I think it's 16th or 17th century. There was an argument in Europe that women might be a separate species, and this is carried over, if not overtly, at least somewhat intuitively, by certain cultures and certainly by certain men. And I would refer again back to the narcissistic sociopaths, whom we call clericalists. Not all clerics are clerical, but there is a lot of difficulty, psychological difficulty in the clerisy, and we need to admit that. So we have to go in several different directions here and understand. I've often thought that the gospel has the answer to every problem, public or private, and we need to understand that the teaching of the gospel is roots us in an understanding of, as Ulrich said, the equality of our baptism, the equality of the baptism of men and women, of women and men, and that we indeed are made in the image and likeness of God.
Yeah, we had a comment from Gloria who pointed out that the Catechism of the Catholic Church says in number 369 that men and women were created in perfect equality as human persons and are both one in the same dignity in the image of God.
I appreciate that, but I will tell you that the Patrochi letter, which again is only published now in Italian, dismisses those discussions. It absolutely dismisses the equality discussions in Scripture and in our teachings.
We had a question from Peter? If you could just repeat, or I don't know if you mentioned it earlier, but what canon law says about female deacons, if anything?
Nothing. What it said, the discussions about the diaconate, I'm not a canon lawyer, the discussions about the diaconate always speak about he, him. The ordinandi is male. I mean, that's all it says.
A comment from Diane Dragonetti. Women who support women deacons are not well enough organized. We have many groups in many places, but they don't work together, and the Vatican thinks we don't have enough support to pay attention to. How do we go about this?
Well, I don't think it's that they're not organized or don't have, they're not, as it might be said in the movies, they're not connected. Yes, it is very interesting that other issues have gotten themselves into the papal audiences and papal meetings. There is a group in the United States, which I believe is also active in Canada to a certain extent, called Discerning Deacons, and they I think they have funding. They certainly have funding, and they have a lot of women discussing. But the problem is crossing the Great Divide and getting a cardinal to get you in to see the Pope. I can affirm that he doesn't want to talk to anybody about women deacons. And I think that's a crime, because I was going to ask people who work for me, or at least one person who works for me, to take a look. It might be a project for your group. Take a look at the papal audiences, or the papal, they call them hearings in English, the papal audiences where individuals have gone in to see the Pope. And if you exclude hierarchs, well, there are two things you could do. First, you could just see who's there, and you'll find that it's like 98% males. But if you exclude hierarchs and you just look at other kinds of people, such as George Weigel, I think you'll find that no women have been in to see the Pope, period. So it's a question of access. It's a question of support. And because of the hierarchical nature of the church, many clerics only want to see where their next promotion is coming from, and they're not going to rock the boat. And either their next promotion or their next job. And it's, yes, you're right. I don't think it's only not being organized. I do think it's also having access. And if you're a cleric, you have better access. So that's why certain persons whom you've mentioned have had access, got in very quickly to see the Pope, and others, are just turned away. And I know that the people from Discerning Deacons and Ceylon met with Pope Francis, but no, I haven't seen anybody the Bulletino comes out every day and it lists who has been in to see Pope Leo, and it's not women for sure, unless you happen to be a queen or president of a country.
So Joe Gunn wonders if there's any hope for study group 5 of the Synod on Synodality. There was a change in the focus of the study group, and there was an interim report that might not have advanced the issues. Are the members of the study group now known? Should we expect much from this process? 5-page synthesis reports are to be released soon, but ?
Yeah, well, the study group 5 was headed supposedly by Armando Mateo. And at the Synod in 2024, when Cardinal Fernandez gave his report, all the other study groups had pictures, headshots of the individual members. Study group 5 put up pictures of the whole staff of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, which to me counters what the initial charge to the study group said, because it included canonical matters. Now, there is a canonist in the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, but that's not the Council of Legislative Texts. And Study Group 5 has said it is not speaking about women in the diaconate. The other problem is Study Group 4, which was supposed to be about the diaconate and the priesthood, has put out its final report, and it says nothing about the diaconate. So not only are women deacons off the table, the diaconate as a whole is off the table in terms of reports of these study groups. I think they're just burying it, and they're saying it needs further study. The further study, if there's further study and further consideration, the consideration must be, as I said earlier, on whether we need women to serve as deacons in our churches. What is the damage done to the people of the world, specifically to women, by affirming that women cannot be ordained, that women are not made in the image and likeness of Christ, that women are not made in the image and likeness of God. That women, and then you can go on with the discussion. You are affirming attitudes about women that are dangerous, absolutely dangerous to women and girls. And you I'm thinking now when I taught at Boston University, I had a student from Iraq, and she didn't want to go back because she was going back to an arranged marriage. The freedom of women around the world is further endangered by the Patriarchy Report, directly endangered by the Patriarchy Report. And if the Vatican wishes to affirm that this is the Vatican's position, I think we are all suffering a terrible, terrible, terrible affirmation of misogyny by the Vatican with this Patriarchy Report. I mean, it is really, and it's interesting because it almost goes in waves. It says A, and it says, well, really not. Then it says B, well, really not. So it kind of backs off from most of its horrendous statements to the end where it says diaconia is Marian, But I think we need to keep focusing on the gospel. It is the gospel that we're talking about. It is the gospel, and the gospel can give the answer to this. If we are to take the gospel seriously, if we are to take Jesus Christ seriously, Jesus Christ in history and Jesus Christ in the world seriously, I think we really need to affirm that women are ordainable historically to the diaconate, and the discussion about women priests is a whole different discussion. The academic discussion on women priests is what level of teaching. There are 4 levels of teaching, and the question is whether that teaching is reformable or irreformable. But to get involved in that really digresses from. And this is really what's attempted in the Patriarchy Report. It digresses from the affirmation of the possibility of restoring women to the ordained diaconate. And then once you restore women to the ordained diaconate, are you going to let them on the altar? I mean, you have weak men who are terrified of the fact of a woman in an alb. Take a look at the comments about the girl who was the altar server for the acolyte for the Pope. It was disgraceful. Look at her hair, and she's wearing Adidas sneakers. That kind of stuff. They wouldn't say that about a man. They wouldn't. And when you look, and when you look into the documents, the official documents, there's a document following Second Vatican Council called Musicum Sacrum, 1967. Which says basically, well, if you really have to have women in the choir, they can't sing from inside the sanctuary. There is a big problem about letting women inside the fence. And if you look at what happens at Vatican ceremonies, now I don't want to criticize Leo right now because I haven't seen a lot of ceremonies and masses inside St. Peter's. But if you look historically, the choirs that have women in them are not inside the sanctuary. And you certainly don't have a lot of women in the sanctuary, except for women families bringing the gifts to the altar and 1 or 2 women reading at the epistle or the prayer of the faithful in the various languages. They'll have a couple of women there. That's a big deal, actually, by the way, to have that. But I think this is the fight. The fight is really why are you saying I am not ordainable? Are you saying my baptism is no good? My baptism is no good. My baptism is somehow faulty because of my body. That to me is scary. And that, as I have said repeatedly, reverberates around the world and really creates serious, not only in Christianity. I mean, beyond Christianity. Do you have more questions?
Yep. So Bob Cherney asks, if dialogue inspired by the Holy Spirit is to be permitted, then a key obstacle is pre-selection of dialogue participants who refuse to consider change. Is there a theological or logical argument against selecting seminarians who are open to change regarding this matter? I would think it would help to talk constantly about foxes and hen houses. If only foxes participate in discussions of hen house governance, there will never be intelligent discussion of the true nature and participation of hens.
That's fun. That's great. Great question, Bob. That's what happened in the Petrocchi report. I was asked by an American cardinal to review the writings and history and comments about women and women deacons of the 10 members of the Petrocchi Commission when it was first named. And my initial assessment was that the votes would be 6 against and 4 in favor. As I said at the top of my talk, as it turned out in the first vote, 2 were in favor and 2 abstained. So my thoughts were pretty good there. Then as I read more, I figured it would be more like 7-3. And as it happened in the second meeting, the votes were 7-1 because there were only 8 people at the second meeting. But that's all we know about. We don't know what happened with vote 1, 2, 6, 8. We only have a couple of badly worded, double negative propositions that they voted on. So yeah, of course. But the discussion is not just among seminarians or among. And that's where synodality comes in. And that's where the problem of the 56% that I mentioned at the top of people who participate in the continental discussions in North and South America, in North America, in the United States and Canada, in North America, 56% were already diocesan employees. If the objective is to spread the gospel, the question is who gets to do what, but we have to do it in communion, then the question needs to be discussed and by everyone. The problem is everybody is walking out the door, particularly the female everybody's. The synod is supposed to be, here comes everybody, but in fact, it's there goes everybody, because people are more and more dissuaded from even bothering to try to say anything to some of these people. And unless the Holy Spirit really takes a hold of the whole thing, I don't think anything will change. So yes, Bob, your comment is well taken and well understood. I actually, in my own not in my diocese, in the Archdiocese of New York, I was in St. Joseph's Seminary years ago doing research, and at lunch, I sat with some young men from my diocese, which is out on Long Island. And I told them I was researching stuff and asked them what they thought about women deacons, women's ordination in general. And they said, well, Jesus ordained the first men priests. I said, well, that's interesting. I didn't know that. They said, well, have you ever heard of Fulton Sheen? I said, yes. They said, well, we saw a movie in class, and that's what he said. Now, there's several levels of comment that I could make on that. First of all, why are you showing old movies in a theological discussion in a seminary? But the naivete and willingness of these young men to accept such a notion totally misunderstands the history of the priesthood, which really didn't start for about 2.5 centuries after the time of Jesus. What Jesus said was, do this in memory of me, and he said it to everybody. And the understanding of the apostolic succession, of the apostolic the creation from the apostles of the episcopes, the overseers, the bishops, who needed help, and we see that in Acts. They needed help, so they got symbolically at least 7 men, and to help with the ministry. It's more than serving tables with the diaconia. And of course, we have in Phoebe, whom Paul introduces to the Romans as a deacon, not a deaconess, by the way. The Greek is deacon with a female article, as a deacon of the Church of St. Craye. And so the letter of Study Group 4 that came out on the priesthood does say that we need more women involved in the formation of seminarians. I think that for a different, more psychological reason, because a woman can spot a troubled child a lot quicker than a man can. But they also need to stop letting in anything that walks, and particularly those who are very formed or stuck in the understanding that women don't image Christ.
When you talked about, I'll just ask my own question here, Phyllis, if I could. You made the point that this is not a doctrinal question, this is a praxis question. You
Right.
also pointed to many examples around the world where there's lots of creativity going on with ministries, and it includes women and men, but it's just kind of a potpourri of responses to the pastoral needs in the setting. What is the resistance? What is to be gained by the hierarchy allowing all of that to go on, if they are, and not try to systematize it so that we actually have a methodology for identifying and affirming ministries exercised by people with the gifts to deliver those ministries?
Well, nothing. I mean, nothing. There's nothing to be gained. What Pope Francis said in response to the Amazon Synod, a couple of things. Responding about the women in the diaconate, he says, the gauntlet has been thrown, I will pick it up. And I will recall my commission, meaning my commission. But he didn't. He said initially he would recall my commission and perhaps add a couple of people to it. But he did not do that. But what he did do was at the time, eventually the legislation changed and women could be installed formally as lectors and acolytes. He also, however, said that there needed to be a better understanding of Canon 517, paragraph 2, parish life coordinators. And these are the people, whether they're not formally called that in Honduras, for example, as I mentioned earlier, as ministers of the word, or they are. There are about 200 actually in South America and about 200 in the United States, if I recall correctly. But his point was they need to be given a official recognition. And the reason, and I kind of agreed with him. I wrote an article in a journal called Studies in Ireland. Suppose, Sister Mary is the parish life coordinator in Guatemala. No, Sister Mary is running the parish in Guatemala. She has no title. Sister Mary is named the parish life coordinator. Good. She has recognition from the bishop. He also, Francis said, we need a stability to this, to my mind, implying a salary. Suppose Sister Mary doesn't have a vocation to the diaconate. Okay. But Jack, the deacon, now comes along. He's a cleric. Are people going to think he's in charge or she's in charge? And worse, and this was also part of the Amazon Synod, suppose Jack the deacon, he becomes a married priest. All of a sudden, a priest comes in, and the assumption is he's in charge. So I think that the recognition of the panoply of ministries that we have needs to be affirmed, and that's part of the discernment. Paragraph 171 of the Synod document, however, says the hierarchy decides what's going to happen, period. So that means that the bishop of the territory is going to affirm what he does. In the United States, there are two dioceses that have installed women as acolytes. One of them is San Antonio with Garcia Silla as the bishop, and the other is Lexington, Kentucky with John Stowe, Franciscan, as the bishop. He needs them in his diocese. He can do it.
Interesting.
Ceylon and Siama in South America, Central and South America, have presented an Amazonian synod, an Amazonian rite to the Congregation for Divine Worship. That includes a request to ordain women as deacons. They feel they're ready and they need it. So I think the point of synodality is we're all together, communion, but we're not necessarily in lockstep, and we all don't need to do the same thing at the same time. I think that's the most important thing.
Thank you. Maybe I'll just finally, and I'm not sure if this is a question or a statement, but I think there's a question in here. This person, Janice, says that the decision was made in July 2022 that women can't be ordained as deacons because we can't emulate Christ's earthly body in our bodies. Not sure who made this decision, but it seems to say that the question has been dealt with. And she says she's also read that Pope Francis ruled we can't be ordained as deacons. So I guess the question is it settled? I think you're saying, Phyllis, that it's actually not settled, and just because the Pope said it to Nora O'Donnell doesn't make it church teaching. So how do you, because people are hearing all these different messages about what's permitted or what isn't. You have to look at your sources. It's not settled. Settled is a funny word anyway, because there's nothing to settle. The question is not, can women be ordained? The question is, are women able to be ordained as deacons? The question is, can women, or do we need women as deacons? I don't know what there was some kind of a reference to July of 2022, which I don't know. Yeah, I don't, sorry.
But in any event, the Petrocchi letter says that, it said that the whole letter says we don't want we don't like the idea of women deacons, but we can't say it definitively. And Pope Francis, the question was not could women be ordained as deacons. The question to Pope Francis was would they? And his response was not on my watch. Well, he's dead, okay? And the question is alive. And no matter how much they try to tamp it down, I think they're playing whack-a-mole. And the important thing is to read actually what the documents say. They want it to go away. A lot of them want it to go away, where I refer to clericalism, narcissism, and sociopathic behavior. They want it to go away. But the reasons they are adducing are that women are not made in the image and likeness of God. And if that's all they have to stand on, I'll refer to the presentation of Interim Seniores in 1976 and Ordinatio Sacerdotalis in 1994. Both were affirmed that by the Secretary of the International Theological Commission, that they had nothing to do with the diaconate. Those two documents. There is no teaching. If you think a TV interview with a throwaway comment by Pope Francis, or a letter from a retired cardinal with secret votes from an unnamed committee, are Catholic doctrine, it's just not. It really is not. The highest teachings of the Church on the diaconate of women are conciliar documents of the early Church that present the fact that women can be ordained as deacons in the whole Catholic Church. In the 18th century, the Holy Synod of Mount Lebanon voted in the Maronite tradition two canons. One, yes, Bishop, you can ordain a woman as a deacon, and secondly, these are her duties. And those canons were approved in forma specifica, that is, just as they were written by the Pope at the time. So we do have a Catholic Church that has canon law that says women can be ordained as deacons. So the question is not can women be ordained as deacons, but will they do it? Just as it had to become clear with canon, whatever it is, 296, something like that, that any layperson can perform the duties of lector and acolyte, that any layperson included females. It took them years, took them 10 years to have a finding that any layperson, I think it was like 92 or 93, 94, any layperson, included women, could be altar servers, could be lectors. And at the beginning, any layperson being a lector, if she was female, was supposed to be reading outside the sanctuary. That's the beginning. And also part of that finding from the Congregation of the Doctrine of Divine Worship was that a bishop doesn't have to have women lectors or acolytes if he doesn't want them. And that's still the case today. And that was the case when the diaconate was rolled out after the Second Vatican Council. If a bishop didn't want male deacons, he didn't have to have them. And there's at least one diocese in the United States that I know of, Lincoln, Nebraska, that does not have any deacons. There are other places in the world that don't have male deacons. This is referenced in the Synod documents. So, but
that kind of leads into this last, I'll make this the last one because I know we're tiring you out, but that does lead into this, I think, a question that will be interesting to a lot of us who are struggling in our local situations. How much latitude Joe asks, how much latitude do bishops have to move ahead on any specific recommendations that came out of local synodal conversations? How much latitude does the local bishop have to implement local synodal recommendations?
Well, that's a big question. You know, depending if the local recommendation is merely one of praxis and affirmed as one of praxis, then he can go ahead and install women as lectors or acolytes, and that's a local decision that can be made. I'm trying to think of what other synodal discussions would come out. Local synodal practice would also include, he could appoint women and men, religious and secular, married and unmarried, canons 517, paragraph 2, parish life coordinators. You know, in the United States, a couple of bishops have had, and some still do have, parish life coordinators. One diocese I know of, the parish life coordinators were out, you know, in the hinterlands, and the canonical pastor, you have to have a canonical pastor, was the vicar general of the diocese. So it was clear that the parish life coordinator was running the show. So how much latitude do they have on local decisions? If the local decision is clearly one simply of praxis and not a touching doctrine, you know, they can do what a bishop can pretty much do what he wants, really. And some bishops, you know, here's a good example. Canon law requires that parishes publish their financial reports, but bishops don't have to make the parishes do it. So, you know, that's kind of in reverse. If the synod decides to try and force the bishop, and the other one is parish councils, depending on like the Archdiocese of Newark requires parish councils, and requires consultation of parish councils or pastoral councils. But not all dioceses do it. A lot of it depends on the bishops, and that's kind of why you have this discussion about the opposing teams in the United States of bishops. Some are called Francis and some are called anti-Francis bishops, you know. And it's pretty clear that some anti-Francis dioceses are pretty locked down. You know, you don't see parish councils, you don't see financial reports, you don't see a lot of transparency. In the United States, I guess the equivalent to your organization would be Voice of the Faithful, and they study finances, and they were formed in light of the sex abuse scandal, which is ongoing. Providence, Rhode Island just released a horrific report about 300 individuals. Or 300 priests, I forget, I don't want to say which it was, but a horrific report about priest-sex abuse over the past 75 years. So anyway. But,
Thank
you know,
you so
I'm
much.
here. My book will be out in the middle of May.
Yeah, give it a plug. Tell us about it. Tell us about your book.
Well, it's called The Vatican and Women Deacons, and it's archival research about the 6 commissions. Happily, many of the commissioners in the beginning were real pack rats. And happily, most of them wrote in French or English, so I was able to get a lot of work done. And archivists from all over the world, in Spain and Belgium and London and Italy, were helpful. And I think it's a pretty hair-raising story. Some people say the subtitle should be "Kicking the Can Down the Road," but it's called "The Vatican and Women Deacons," and it is a study of seven six commissions. The first, 1973, then again, coordinated or concentral with that, the first iteration of the International Theological Commission, then the 1997 report that was not promulgated, the 2002 report that was promulgated, my commission, 2016 to 2018, which had a secret report that I never saw, by the way. I have no idea what the Pope got. None of us, we know what we wrote, but we were not permitted to see what the Pope got. And then this final Petrocchi commission that apparently had reports from its two initial meetings and then its final meeting. But then there's just this 7-page summary letter, which, as I said earlier, I think was written in French and it's translated into really clunky Italian. And I hope will be published soon by America Magazine with my commentary.
We'll watch for that. And we'll watch for the book in May, and we'll do a review on our newsletter. So
thank you.
Thank you so much, Phyllis. And I'm now, if I could ask our dear friend Veronica Dunn, who is a member of Catholic Network for Women's Equality, as well as a sister of Our Lady of the Missions, to offer Phyllis thanks on our behalf.
Well, Phyllis, thank you very much for what has been a very illuminating presentation. What I particularly like is that you call them as you see them. There's no kind of hedging or walking around the issue, like you get straight to the point. And you certainly helped me and us listen more deeply to the long memory of the Church and to the questions of this moment and to the quiet movements of the Spirit within those sectors. In a time when many feel both hope and disappointment about the question of women in the Church and in the diaconate, your scholarship opens space not only for understanding, but for faithful practice and faithful imagination. So I thank you for your wisdom. I thank you in particular for your endurance, that you continue on, your integrity, and for the light you bring to this ongoing and ongoing and ongoing discernment. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Veronica. And again, thank you, Phyllis. So just to wrap up, the recording of today's presentation will be made available on our YouTube channel and our website in a few weeks. So if you registered for today, you will receive an email with the recording link. To receive news of our other program offerings, please sign up at our website using the contact button. There are some exciting upcoming events that I think you won't want to miss. On Wednesday, April 15th at 7 o'clock, we're having a conversation with author Renee Bondi about her novel Non-Disclosure, which explores the impact of clergy sexual abuse in a Southern Ontario community. On Sunday, April 26th, we'll have Massimo Fagioli with us, speaking about the Church's guiding star, Vatican II, and Synodality. And on May 24th, Sunday at 2 p.m., we will be learning about human trafficking, a challenge for Indigenous communities, with Dr. Rosalma MacDonald. So these presentations, as well as all our other programs and activities, are free of charge. And if you would like to help us to continue providing this type of programming focused on empowering the laity, and if it's within your means, please consider making a financial contribution to CLC through our website. We're a registered charity. You'll receive a charitable receipt for income tax purposes. Anything you're able to provide will help us cover the costs of offering our volunteer-run programs. Big thank you to everyone who already supports us, whether financially, with your prayer, with your talents, however you support us with your presence. We're just grateful that we're on this journey together. Our prayer continues to be for lay Catholics everywhere to come together, to learn together, to pray together, and to act together for healing, reconciliation, and transformation in our church and in our world. As you leave here today and as you continue your Lenten journey, we hope you are enriched in your understanding of what it means to be church, confirmed in your faith, and inspired to do whatever is given to you to do to build up the body of Christ in our place and time. God bless everyone, and thank you again for coming. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and may you have a glorious Easter.